started tonight, I thought I would survey the audience and see who we have here. Raise your hand in the room if you have heard of Kickstarter. Good start, hands down. Okay, raise your hand if you have donated money to a Kickstarter project, invested in. Wow, okay. And then last, raise your hand if you have ever raised money for a creative project on Kickstarter. Awesome. Good that your hand was raised.
Yeah, I've done a couple. Yeah,
couple?
Totally. Yeah,
Couple?
totally.
What's your favorite?
I've done 3. 2 are kind of the same. I do like meta projects because I don't have a lot of time to actually do a lot of creative projects outside of my job. But one was called This Is Not a Kickstarter Shirt, which is, there's a punk band, hardcore band from DC called Fugazi who famously didn't allow merch to be made for their band. So they made t-shirts that said, "This is not a Fugazi shirt." They didn't make them, other people did.
Okay.
So I made a Kickstarter project where it would make a t-shirt that would have the final stats of the project on it, so however many backers there were in money pledged. So I've made 2 shirts, one 532 people have, the other one 750 some people have.
And so how was the follow through on the project?
It was good. The first one, I really wanted to experience the challenges of fulfilling a project to hundreds of people, so I decided I was going to do it entirely myself and have no help from anybody. And yeah, I ended up posting a project update video of me complaining about how hard it was. It was terrible. My house was just full of piles of t-shirts, and I realized I shouldn't have offered like 8 different colors. I made every mistake that people make. I experienced them all firsthand.
Yancey, that's not real good marketing.
And the second time I just paid someone else to do it for me, which, yeah, was more enjoyable. But yeah.
Okay, let's dial back a second. So you launched this company with 2 co-founders in 2009. Since then, 10 million people have backed projects. You have had $2.2 billion pledged, and more than 101,000 projects have been funded. How did you get started in August of 2009?
It was April of 2009 we launched.
Okay.
But it, you know, it got started a lot earlier. The creator of Kickstarter is a guy named Perry Chen who grew up here in New York City on Roosevelt Island, and he had the idea in 2001. He had wanted to throw a concert in New Orleans, and basically like had this idea for a show. It was going to take him 20 grand to put it together, and which stopped it from happening. But he had this thought of, well, he could have proposed the idea for the show, and people could have basically pre-bought a ticket, but people would only be charged if the show sold out. And if the show didn't, if no one was interested, like whatever, no one wanted this.
Sure.
And that just like immediately crystallized in his mind as like, this is a really good idea. But you know, he was interning at a recording studio and hanging out in New Orleans, which is what you do there, and just like wasn't a tech person. And this is 2001 internet, which is like pets.com and Yahoo are the only 2 websites that existed.
Right, and we're still talking about dial-up.
Yeah, and we're talking about dial-up.
Yeah.
So he moved back to New York. He was from in 2005, and we met in Brooklyn, and at a restaurant where he worked, and I was a regular, and we got to be friends. And at the time, I was working as a music critic, writing mainly for the Village Voice, and we just started talking about this idea. But 2005 internet is also crazy. Like YouTube is brand new. I don't know if Facebook existed yet.
It had just been born. Only college kids used it.
Yeah.
MySpace was the big thing.
Yeah, we had it took us 4 years to launch the site because I'm a rock critic and he was waiting tables at the time, and Charles, our third founder we found a year later, is a great designer, but still like none of us could actually practically build Kickstarter.
Did any of you code?
No, none of us coded. But at the time, like it was all built around our MySpace widget strategy was how we thought about Kickstarter. So it's just it's a very different time. So there's a long history. There's always a long history behind these things. And it was the same for us. So for Perry, it was 8 years from having the idea to it seeing the light of day for the first time. For myself, it was 4 years of being a part of it.
So you and Perry meet.
Yeah.
How do you go from that's a cool idea to this is a company?
You know, begrudgingly every step of the way, just based on who we are. Well, you know, just sometimes I didn't know this, but you'll have an idea that like to be anything actually needs to be some sort of like collaborative thing, and eventually that needs to be a company. And you end up finding that there are these mediums, these channels that you have to go through, just because that's like the form that the idea takes. And the desire was never to build a company. It was just we were really compelled by this idea. And what was compelling about it was two things. One, that as like just really big fans of people, and having some vague sense of how the business worked, we just knew that it was very hard for creative people to do anything interesting, and that because you had to get financed for it, and that the way that you got financing is by being able to say to someone, if you give me money to make this, you're going to make a lot of money. This is a great investment for you. This can be a hit, but it's always from this mentality of producing a profit.
Right.
But art and creativity, like that's like gravy. It's more like trying to make something that you feel proud of and that is somewhat approximate to the idea you had in your head. Like that's victory.
Right.
And we felt like we just saw that the whole way the culture industry worked didn't account for that very well. There are grants and there are people that do that the right way, but those are quite cumbersome. And so could there be a world where a great idea could happen just because other people thought it was cool? And I don't know, it just felt like, isn't that a universe that we should live in where that's possible? And can we create some pocket of the universe that operates that way?
Right.
So we were very, very compelled by that.
So you hit upon this idea, and this idea is part of this larger trend, which is crowdfunding. And you guys were really first with it in a lot of ways. And that is, if you look at the defining ideas to that generation of the web, crowdfunding is certainly one of them. Most entrepreneurs, when they hit on one of those defining ideas, let's say social networking, they then raise $1 billion and turn it into a $200 billion company like Facebook. You guys chose a very different path to the actual building of the company. I just would love for you to tell us a little bit about how you raised money. Was that who told you that was a good idea?
Well, the first investor in Kickstarter is David Cross, the comedian from Mr. Show. You might know him as Tobias Funke from Arrested Development. That guy, David's, he's great, but he's the first investor in Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And this is when Arrested Development was being canceled for either the first or second time. And that was, I was a fan of the show and had this idea of, oh my God, this is how we can launch Kickstarter. We can all save Arrested Development. And so,
which is a great idea.
Which is a great idea. And Perry went to college with David's cousin.
Okay.
And through our Hollywood connections,
Yeah.
Perry sat down with David and pitched him on this. And David explained, you clearly don't know how the entertainment industry works. There's no way like Fox, all these people will agree to this. But he was really compelled by the idea and asked to invest. And so the very first investors were David, the head of 4AD Records, the publisher of Pitchfork, like people who are in our network who are also themselves creative and just like saw why this was important.
Right.
And then, the typical other friends and family. And, so we used that money to get to eventually a site being built, and there's like hours of mistakes to talk about there. But about 6 months after we launched, 4 months after we launched, we had a traction. There was an article in the New York Times about a fake wedding chapel that got built in the Lower East Side through Kickstarter, and Jenna Wortham, a great reporter, wrote about us. Since we were like starting to be, on the map a little bit, and the platform worked. I mean, it like a blockbuster project at that time was raising like $8,000, but it worked, and it was doing exactly what we hoped it would do. And so we wanted to actually have some employees and for us to be paid for the first time, because none of us were being paid. So we went out to try to raise some money. And so we ended up we raised venture capital money from one firm here in New York called Union Square Ventures, and a partner there named Fred Wilson. And we first met Union Square like 3 years before, when we are like three dudes who don't know anything, who have a pitch deck that is so embarrassing to look at now. It was embarrassing to look at even then, but, and we're there being like, we have this great idea. And, we met every investor in New York and like whatever the name people are and some outside New York, and nobody liked it. They all, I remember one person saying like, isn't there enough art in the world, like literally, and like nobody liked it. Nobody liked it. And like the idea of crowdfunding did not exist. Like we create, this was created by Kickstarter, right. and nobody liked it. And then we met with Union Square Ventures. We met with Brad Burnham, one of the partners there, who's a brilliant, brilliant man. And like 2 minutes in the meeting, he's like, yeah, I buy it. So like, why can you guys do this? And like we totally stumped us. We like didn't expect that to be the case, but they were the only people that saw it. And they were first in Twitter and first in Tumblr and Foursquare and SoundCloud. They have just a lot of wonderful companies, and we were very proud to work with them. So that was exciting that we were able to talk to Fred, who's just a great figure and a really good man and a cultural person. But the twist for us is that, coming from where we came from and feeling a reluctance around this being a company right. and us being business people, we're also very specific in what we wanted. And Perry said to Fred, like, we're never going to sell the company and we will never try to go public. The idea here is that we want to be something like a public utility, but like a hyper-mission focused private company that's just doing its own thing, but trying to serve the singular purpose and forget everything else. And, if we are to work with you, it needs to be that we all understand that you're not going to pressure us to do those things.
Well, and here's what strikes me about that as weird, Yancey. Venture capitalists have two goals. One, to sell the company. Two, to take it public.
Yeah.
And so why would Union Square Ventures decide that it would be a good thing to invest in you?
Well, we're in the same fund as their Twitter investment, so maybe they're just like, we already made $1 billion, so it's fine. Like here's some patronage. Maybe it's that. I just think that they liked us, and Perry stepped away as CEO to become chairman about 2.5 years ago, and I stepped into the seat then, and at the time, Fred wrote a blog post. He has a great blog, and where he talked about that first conversation with Perry, and he remembered this conversation around never selling, never going public, and he said that, to be honest, he didn't believe him. That because everybody says this, and then a check comes across the table, and you're like, you think right. about your family and those things, and but Fred admitted after 5 years he realized that we meant it. Right. But that he didn't regret it at all. He's proud to be a part of this, and we're proud to work with Fred. But we've have always had a quite specific idea, and have been very deterministic in trying to build this, and not have this be something that is released to the market and then just becomes whatever the hell people want it to, but wanting to serve this purpose of being that way for something to happen just because it's cool, of a place for unmakeable ideas to be makeable, mm-hmm. And that's still, and honestly, staying true to that is a daily challenge.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, because I would imagine that once you began to gain momentum, there would be a lot of different ways that you could have grown the company, perhaps a lot of different directions you could have followed, things coming in. At what point was it probably hardest to stay focused?
Well, probably the most, outside of right now, I think right now is the most interesting time in our history as a company. But outside of right now, it would be in 2012 when there started to be $1 million projects for the first time. And before then there had been 2 projects that got 6 figures. And then on one day, February 9th, 2012, 2 projects crossed $1 million for the first time within 3 hours of each other. And one of them was a video game, Double Fine Adventure, that had launched the night before. And suddenly, Kickstarter goes from like the thing that people like and appreciate and sort of patronizingly tap on the head as like, it's cute that you exist, which we're fine with, to suddenly like the internet's lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Like never before in history has there been something like this. Someone with an idea can just express it and then have $1 million in a day.
Yeah.
Still, I mean, like, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Kickstarter does that. Nothing else does that. And of course, that's very exciting. And to experience it for the first time is wild, absolutely wild. And we went from having none for the first 3 years to suddenly there were about a dozen in maybe 10 weeks. And so it was just crazy, crazy, crazy. And it sort of reaches its climax about 3 months later with Pebble, which created smartwatches, which raised more than $10 million before shutting down its project, saying we don't want to raise any more money. They could have gone even more, but they just said this is like enough. And while we enjoyed the experience of going through that, we also had great concerns around what it was doing, because we were actually seeing that the sort of people expressing interest in using Kickstarter was changing quite a bit, as you might expect.
Did you feel like Kickstarter had been kidnapped by the marketers to use as a platform to test?
It wasn't marketers yet. This is still just people with ideas. This is just the power of the platform. It really is the power of the platform, unfettered. But what we saw was the beginnings of professionalization. And it's something that continues now. It continues now. There are people who have enormous success with Kickstarter using very advanced tools, and they will teach others how to do it. And it's complicated because I absolutely, like, we as a company benefit from that financially and from the way that we grow, but also, I wouldn't want to end up like the App Store, and you don't want to lose the amateurism.
Right.
And we will remain very focused on the starter part of Kickstarter.
How big is the starter part of Kickstarter relative to the other things happening on the platform at this point?
Well, I mean, if we're talking other things, we're probably talking gadgets, I would say. And a lot of those are very much in the same idea of starter, like two people in a garage, classic stories. There are others that are, people that are more experienced and are thinking of this as a launch platform, marketing platform for what they do. And it's a very small minority, but they're the ones that get all the press. I mean, we're talking like less than 5% of projects.
Right.
Like tiny, tiny sliver, but they create massive amounts of attention. I mean, right now there are incredible projects live from like world-renowned artists. Robert Irwin, the Queen's Museum, William Kittredge. PRI has a great project now about live right now about funding crisis journalism, global crisis journalism. But if you were to do some Kickstarter news search, what would you see? You'd probably see gadgets on TechCrunch being what's getting the most attention.
Right.
And so that's a tension that we deal with, that we have opinions on and continue to work through. But that moment when we had the $1 million projects for the first time was a real a crisis of identity.
Yeah.
And basically our answer to that was we ended up rolling out a series of new rules and basically a set of governance ideology around gadgets under a heading of Kickstarter is not a store. But basically the idea was, what are the truth in advertising laws for Kickstarter?
Yeah.
How is it that we create a level of transparency? How is it that people can't pitch a 3D rendering of something that doesn't exist and pretend that it does? How do we ground this in realism and process?
Right.
And that's still an ongoing thing. Right. But that was a moment where, honestly, we stepped in front of a money train and said, no, thank you. I remain very proud of that.
So let's explain for a second just how Kickstarter makes money.
Sure. It's very simple. Every Kickstarter project has a funding goal of how much money they want to raise. If they reach their goal, they get their cash, and if they get paid, we get paid. We get 5% of what they raise. So the only way we make any money is if the platform is successful in helping the creator get the funds they need.
And so in light of that, it's useful to just remember that by choosing to be very disciplined about the people that you support on Kickstarter, you are also choosing to turn off a certain profit spigot that you could easily have access to.
Sure.
In a commitment to the larger community.
Yeah, and
the idea.
yeah, sure, charity, all these things. These are areas that from the very beginning we did not want to do, and yeah, I've always felt very secure in that.
So you have been profitable fairly early. You've been profitable for a while, right?
Yeah.
And you are the CEO. Have you always been the CEO right from the beginning?
No, I'm a newbie still. Yeah, I mean, I've been the CEO since January 1st, 2014, which is essentially the same day we moved into a fancy new office in Brooklyn. So just like pressure is on.
Right.
But yeah, been guiding the company with Perry and Charles, my co-founders, from the beginning. But yeah, relatively new at this gig.
And what I would really love to talk about is the structure of your company, which is fairly unusual. First, you became a B corporation, and then you moved to a PBC, a public benefit corporation.
Yeah.
So tell us about that progression.
Well, it's interesting being I think that we think a lot about structure and the structure of a for-profit company in America, and especially what the financialization of all parts of culture has led to is this need for companies to maximize returns and basically just try to make as much money as possible.
Right.
And we
called
have never
capitalism.
Yeah, and well, it's what Milton Friedman says capitalism is, but that's it's a modern interpretation by Wall Street. But we haven't wanted to be that way, and we've never behaved that way. But yet, if we imagined if Kickstarter's around in 100 years, none of us, maybe our cryogenically frozen heads are still running the company, but probably we're dead and someone else is doing it. And as long as we are within this structure that demands just increasing growth at all costs, there can very easily be a day where Kickstarter really loses the plot and gets ruined. And so we became aware of this new legal designation that's only come into existence the past 4 years called a public benefit corporation. The only company you would have heard of that is a public benefit corporation is Patagonia. But the basic idea of a public benefit corporation is that a company is equally responsible to their shareholders and to providing a positive benefit to society. So not just we won't pour mercury in the rivers, but a positive benefit to society. And when a company becomes a public benefit corporation, they have the option to write a charter which declares what your commitments are.
Right.
And then for us, we're going to say every year we'll provide a public paper reporting on how we've done according to these standards. So this process of becoming a public benefit corporation is pretty intense, where all your shareholders have to vote, and at least 66% of them must vote yes. So that's how much it takes to change the Constitution, I think, in the U.S. There's also the states part, but and all of our shareholders agreed, even though this definitely means we will not try to make as much money as possible. We're going to try to go a different route, but all of our shareholders agreed. And we also shared with them what our charter would say around what we would be held accountable to. So
let's go back a second. Before you even get to your charter, who gets to say what the public benefit part of a public benefit corporation is?
The company does. There is there's a legal body in Delaware that I think that reviews it to make sure it's not we'll provide Skittles to children. That's our benefit. Keeps it from being a perversion.
Yeah.
But someone will find a way to manipulate it into a perversion for sure. But yeah, it's something like that. But it legally commits the company. It's on paper. I can be sued for I think, I don't know, something can happen if we fall short of it. Yeah. And so the things we laid out, and these are things that are, unless 66% of shareholders vote to change them, will be permanent as long as Kickstarter exists. It codifies our mission of helping bring creative projects to life. It mandates that we engage in the environments and conditions affecting artists and creative people, regardless of whether Kickstarter is involved. It commits us.
What is that? What do you mean by that?
Well, we actually want to be an advocate for artists more generally, not just for them to use Kickstarter, but just
we as in the founders, or we as in Kickstarter?
The Kickstarter, the company.
Yeah.
That we will be engaged and that we will try to support artists and creators in ways that are not just about them using Kickstarter.com.
Got it.
We also talk about setting a higher standard of corporate governance. Those things include never selling user data, fighting requests for government data, trying to have a minimal environmental impact. Most interestingly, committing ourselves to not employing any legal but esoteric tax avoidance strategies. And that we will publicly report our tax rate and exactly how we arrived at those things every year. That we will support artists working in less commercial areas. That we will fight systemic inequality in various ways, and that finally we will donate 5% of our annual profits, half to organizations providing arts and music education, primarily in New York City, and half to organizations fighting to end systemic inequality. So we just want to plant a stake in the ground and just say, this is who we are, this is what we'll be about.
And you guys are reporting on this every year. Actually, legally, you only have to report on it every other year.
Yeah, and you don't even have to do it publicly. We go all the way. If we're going to do it, we're going to go all the way. So in February 2017, we'll have our first annual report. We've now been at PBC for 5 months. And it's actually changed the way we behave. It actually gives a sense of permission to say what you actually think. Because like once you put that down, once you lay it out, I don't know, like why mince words anymore? Like why not?
What do you mean by that? Give me an example.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have a good example right now, but I just think it's a mandate for courageousness.
Yeah.
It just says that, we as a company we're trying to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're trying to, we believe that there are ways that society should be quite different. And so if we believe that, we need to put our cards on the table and we need to make ourselves the first to jump in. And I don't know, the way we take a stand on things. I mean, last week we co-signed an amicus brief filed about the Apple case. It was like us and 7 other companies. Those are easy calls now. In the past, maybe that's like a 2-week discussion of like, do we do this? What are the implications? Now it's just like, no, the PB says we fight government requests for data. We're in, whatever we need to do. And so it creates a lot of clarity around things that are often quite difficult, and it's sort of like a North Star around where do we want to weigh in. So
do you find that it's harder to recruit talent because they have less of a profit incentive?
No, much easier. Much easier. And these are the people you want to work with. It's much easier. I mean, we had a great person join us from Facebook last week. I mean, we pull in very, very talented people, and so much of it is, and I don't think we've done a great job of communicating these things about us yet. I think we have a world of improvement to go, but people just their senses pick up that like, these people are weird. These people are doing things in a less typical way, and I'm interested in being a part of that. And so we are a team of liberal arts refugees, of idealists, and of people that, feel dissatisfied with the status quo. I mean, the internal mission and philosophy book that new employees get, the last page of it reads, "We believe in art and culture, fuck the monoculture." And so, it's like there are people that have a similar emotional reaction that we do to that, and like, those are great people to work with.
Right. So this makes a lot of sense in the moment that we exist right now, which is a very enthusiastic moment for tech startups still. And you're in a growth business doing something that is very, very popular. Yeah. And we're also at a point where it feels at least like the tech startup climate is starting to change. Valuations are coming down. Tech entrepreneurs are a lot more stressed out than they were. I'm curious how a changing economy could impact the decision to do particularly the things that are quite onerous, perhaps, in your charter.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, those have to be. You can't be fair. You can't be like a fair weather idealist, right? I mean, it can't. It's like that's
Well,
that's a problem.
can.
You can, yeah. A lot of people are, but yeah, you can't do that. And we now have a legal requirement that we cannot do that. But we launched in April '09, and that was the apocalypse. I mean, that was the economic apocalypse, and that's when we started. And we were trying to fundraise. I mean, that was like post Lehman Brothers, all that. So. And we just as we do now to this day, we just did it scrappy, and you just find a way, and the determined will find a way. I think that, when we raised money from Union Square Ventures and the angel investors then were like Jack Dorsey and Joey Ito, who runs MIT Media Lab, and Katerina Fake, and like glitterati names, and we swore everyone to secrecy, and we didn't reveal that who we raised money from, I think for 3 years later in Wired, in our first feature there. But we were just we don't want that to be our story, because that's like inside baseball stuff. That's just gossipy. That doesn't really matter, but it's just a way you flex muscle in the technology industry so that you're able to raise more money. But we didn't want to do that. And so, I'm a consumer of technology news, so and of course, there's the schadenfreude of you gobble up the negative stuff. It's way more fun than somebody's killing it. It's like some part of your brain that feels anxious about the success of others, is satisfied by that. But I don't know. It feels to me like a lot of the narratives built around technology are driven by venture capitalists for own reasons of self-interest, and now it's kind of the same thing happening again.
Same thing happening again with regard to
and the same thing of driving valuations down, and
is as useful as driving.
Yeah, I'm not
Sure.
I don't mean to be conspiratorial about it, but people do benefit from these things. But for us,
well, what I'm
for us,
hearing you say
being
in part is that it's more of a distraction than anything
well,
that
for
impacts
sure.
your business.
We our office is in Greenpoint, which is
Kind
an
of far from
outpost in
Palo
New York
Alto?
City, much less from Silicon Valley. And,
Sure.
I go out to Silicon Valley probably 4 or 5 times a year, really to recruit. And, it's wild. We talked about this the other day, but, when you're in that environment, and especially in the technology space, you just suddenly are just filled with this high of anything is possible, and oh my God, we should be dreaming bigger. And there's such a hyper ambition where there's no tension with that and the reality of the present day. The reality of present day is just details.
Yeah.
It's all about this amazing, and everyone is creating this utopia, and it's exhilarating. Yeah. It's exhilarating. You're sitting in traffic and it's but you're amped, and it's wild. And so going there and getting that for a 4-day stretch every 4 months is pretty chill. And then you come back and, the high fades and you're you want to tell, I want to tell my coworkers these 5 ideas you had. And then as you're saying them, you're oh, maybe that's not such a great idea.
Is that what New York does to you?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's just, but I like that experience.
Yeah.
I find that experience to be really nice because
Yeah.
it's just oh, think bigger and okay, be realistic about it. It's it's an excellent tension.
Right.
But I find that environment to be fascinating, and it's this is just such a moment in time. It really is. It will just be a fascinating moment in time that I think will be looked back on. This is like the 1850s when Rockefeller, all these people are creating railroads, and the empires the next century were being built. People are clearly behaving now, feeling the same way.
The great build-out of the digital infrastructure.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
let's just create the online version of something that's popular in the real world. That's what people are doing.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad game.
Well, so you guys have done this one thing awesome. How do you innovate? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, we don't want to ride the same horse into the sunset. It also, if you look at the web, it's clear that areas of the web are generational, and there are these changeovers, and people will think of new ways to do things, and obviously, so we want to be the people to think of those things, but innovation and R&D is a big point of focus for me right now, especially because our mission statement is to help bring creative projects to life. Our mission statement does not contain the word crowdfunding. We pioneered this and made it incredibly popular, but it was never the intent. It was just a really interesting mechanic Perry dreamt up to allow art and creative projects to happen. But always the focus is on the output. And so we're thinking a lot about other areas to move into, but it's really about non-crowdfunding products. It's around thinking around what are the other tools and services that could really help creative people bring their ideas to life. And we have some ideas that we're very excited about. But it's interesting for us, we're 135 people, which is both really big and also really small at the same time for our level of ambition. And again, there's a real scrappiness to what we do. And I spent a lot of time looking at how is Google diversified? How is Amazon diversified? And a lot of it's just throwing tons and tons of money at things, whether buying YouTube for $1 billion or just, creating R&D labs where, billions of dollars get spent searching for a next hit.
Right.
But we need to do that in a scrappy way, and that's going to be a very interesting experience, and one that I'm really throwing myself into, and I think is critical for us as a company thinking of the long term.
When you look at those companies and you look at how they think about making new things, they still use the lens through which they made their core product.
Definitely.
So you see Google thinks that every problem is a search problem, no matter what the problem is. Similarly, Facebook thinks that every problem is a social problem. How do you, as a leader of a company, try to stretch beyond that and make sure that every problem at your company isn't a crowdfunding problem?
Yeah, we don't have that issue. I mean, I think that what I think about is, when I was a music writer and was on the periphery of that world. So much of the conversation around music in the early 2000s was around piracy and really was like, how do you monetize music? And actually, how do you monetize content? It's still the conversation now, but music was where it started. And I was just always struck by the fact that the monetization of music is like a businessman's problem. For an artist, again, the challenge is I want to make something, I want to do it in a way that I feel good about it. I would love to not have to have a day job while I did that, but the challenges are around creation. And what I just felt so strongly, especially as we were starting on Kickstarter, was everyone's looking at the wrong place. Everyone's looking at how do we make more money off the shit we can sell, but just assuming that there's just this constant stream of stuff that's just going to come. Yeah. And what we were doing is we were looking much earlier in the process to a place where it was totally unclear how you can make money or what business actually existed there. But we wanted to be in the business of idea manifestation. Yeah. And that was a powerful lesson to think about looking earlier in the process. Because later on, when it's about selling stuff that already exists, there are so many people trying to solve those problems, and ultimately, Amazon seems to be the answer to almost all of them. But
it's true.
Looking earlier and thinking about what are the tools that people need, or what are interesting experiences to get people to collaborate or to bring people together, I think those are very underserved areas. And again, for us to be distinctly Kickstarter and not just chasing the money and not trying to be a generic company, those are the areas where we think to look. And so, I don't know, we'll carry that philosophy and we'll see where it goes. And I'm definitely preparing the team for there'll be way more misses than hits for sure. But having the stomach and having,
Thank you.
And just having the drive and the willingness to challenge what is an already successful enterprise and to really try to make it into something fundamentally new and even more meaningful, and to have that drive to have an ambition beyond what we've already achieved, is it. That's everything. And so, I don't know, it's really fun. It has me extremely excited.
How much of your time are you spending on it right now?
It's all new. I mean, it's constantly running in my mind, but yeah, I don't know, maybe a day a week.
So I have a bunch of good questions from
Okay.
our audience. Let's start with this one. How did Kickstarter do market promotion at the very early stages?
Yeah, it's still close to the most sophisticated marketing we've ever done, which is that in the month or so before the site launched, we gave about 50 of our friends invitations to start a project, and they also got 5 invitations to give to their friends, and that was all we did. That was all we did.
How about the people who funded the project?
When you first start a project, this is the beauty of Kickstarter. When you first start a project, as a lot of people here have raised their hands saying they backed a project, you email the people that most love you, and you're like, listen, if you've heard me talk about the poetry thing, like I'm actually going to do it now. I love you so much, thank you, and you're happy to support your friend during that, And what happens when that person sends out the email about, the long-awaited poetry anthology they're finally releasing is that 15 of their friends are like, oh shit, wow, I have that thing I've been meaning to do, or this thing I've been talking about with Linda, like maybe we do it this way. And there's this very close social validation that happens of people just seeing their friends having success with it.
Yancey, what happens if they don't finish the poetry anthology?
If they don't finish the poetry anthology, well, in that case, probably the friends weren't going to read the book anyway.
That's the truth.
That's patronage there. But yeah, of course there are projects that don't fulfill. We actually collaborated with Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and a professor there to do the largest study of Kickstarter projects ever, and came back finding that 9% of Kickstarter projects failed to deliver. And we found that number to be fascinating, and I think far less than what people may imagine, because of course you hear about every failure and you don't hear about the successes. But it happens, and in those cases, a lot of people are left, the backers are left empty-handed, but our policies encourage creators to just basically offer a public postmortem about what happened and what went wrong, and to let it be a learning moment. And we're seeing more creators doing that, and we think that's the right sort of outcome. Of course, not every creative project will work out well, and you want people to be ambitious, and but it's definitely one of the.
What do you do about flat-out fraud? Do you have a lot of it?
No, there's very little. I mean, that study found that it's extremely rare.
Yeah.
Because remember that money only changes hands if a group of people have agreed that it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And we generally trust in the crowd to make good decisions. So historically, it's about 40% of projects that are successfully funded, and then of those, the success rate of fulfillment is very high.
So our audience wants to know if you can talk about some of your early mistakes at the company. You cared too much.
Yeah, not knowing how to code. I mean, we made a very classic mistake, which is that we hired an external development team to build Kickstarter, and even worse, it was a good friend of mine that I went to college with.
Oh.
Yeah, just double whammy, and that was a disaster, and that we lost a couple of years to. And during the time we were meeting with investors or various people, and they would ask about the tech team, we'd tell them about this, and they would just say that's not a good idea. And our attitude was, whatever, old man, maybe in your day, but for us, they were right. And inevitably, those sort of lessons are right. So there's several of those that we had to learn on our own.
Okay.
That was one. I mean, those early decks are just so overly ambitious to be very embarrassing.
Yeah.
But I like those. I like naive mistakes.
Yeah.
Like that's the right. We were talking about I'm very much an optimist, and I'd rather make a mistake believing the best in people than not do something based on a cynical or fearful view.
Well, I think that before we were on stage together, I flat out accused you of being naive, and your answer to that was.
Yeah, great.
So Stephanie would like to know, I hear you have an awesome office in Greenpoint that grew very quickly. How many people are on your operations support team, and how did you and they manage the growth while being faithful to your goals?
Well, the support team is, I think, 8 or 9 people. Yeah, and the company, when we first moved in there, we were about 65 people. We're now about 135 people. So we've grown a lot in the past 6 months. We've been hiring a lot around just building an amazing design team, amazing engineering team, but like investing in the business, pouring our profits into the company, and really trying to take it to the next level. And growing while having such a specific idea around what you want the company to be is frankly terrifying. My wife Jamie, who's here, we had our first child 8 weeks ago tomorrow, and so I ended up being out on.
He wouldn't come. I don't know why.
Yeah, he's at a better talk. So I ended up being out of the office for like 6 weeks, and at the start of the year, like 20 people started. And we've never had so many people start before, but like a lot of hires in the fourth quarter. Everyone wants new year, new you, new job. And so, I'm at home seeing these emails of like all these new people starting, and I'm like chewing my hands off of like, oh my God, 10 people started today, and I'm not there to like tell them everything, which of course is like a foolish attitude to have, but it's just driven me to think a lot more around, how do you like, basically, if we were to imagine, you're trying to colonize Mars with a new Kickstarter team, like what's a set of instructions where it would turn out reasonably on point? What are the principles? What are the ways of thinking? And so that's something that I'm working a lot on right now, but are starting to do. But yeah, we are just.
Where do you learn how to do that?
Well, I mean, that specifically, I wrote in a notebook for like 5 pages in a notebook of different thoughts that are all like terrible generic things, and then you reread the Netflix culture deck, and then you're like, oh man, this gets so much right. But for me, the way I try to think about it eventually was, why do I think we've been successful? What are the lessons that I would want us to not forget as we're moving forward? So that was like 5 things. And then I thought about, of the people here who have been very successful, what are the traits I think they've had? Mm-hmm. And I made a list of those 5 things. So I laid them out so that weren't like capital P principles, capital V values, which have like so much pressure, but more just like, gut check. What are the things I think have gotten us to this point? And so as someone starting this company, or someone like making a decision right now, like you are immediately empowered to make real decisions in this company, how would I hope for you to make them? Or what from our past would suggest what we could do? And so trying to start from there, and we'll see how that goes.
Well, in addition to that, Yancey, I mean, I don't get from you that in 6th grade you said, I want to be the CEO of a tech company. I'm going to start preparing. So here you are with this job. Where outside of Kickstarter do you get advice on how to do it well?
My wife. I have a peer group of other CEOs who are all like kind of at the same level. There's no 60-year-old who's been through the shit and back. But there's just a lot of peer support there. Mm-hmm. But I think it's mostly instinct. Yeah. It's mostly instinct, and it's like just, I don't know, you're just learning all the time, and the job pushes you into increasingly bigger challenges. And the truth I found is that as you get better at what you do, you actually end up working a lot less hard. Or like, it's just, you just know. Yeah. You just know what to do.
You're in the flow and you trust yourself.
Yeah, and I feel like I've been there for like a good year of just like, and who knows, you could be wrong about everything. And there are those nights where you have that fear, but you just see things. Yeah. And it's just very clear to you.
So here's a related question. How did you ground yourself when facing the crossroads in the identity crisis for Kickstarter?
It just helps that we never really wanted this. That this wasn't the goal. This this wasn't the goal. Like the goal is the thing.
By
And
this, you mean the company.
yeah. And even like,
Not the mission.
there have been times where I've tried to play out, okay, let's imagine we decided that we wanted Kickstarter to be like the Amazon of crowdfunding, the Walmart, whatever. We're just going to do it all, be big. And immediately I think that sounds way less fun, like way less fun. And also I imagine seeing like 2 weeks later the article about the new funding platform for creative projects at launch, and I would feel so jealous. I'd be like, oh my God, that's like, right, we had it so good. Why did we let our ego take us to this place that we never wanted?
Yeah.
Why did we let a narrative about wanting to be winning in the press like take us to a place that is not what our heart desired? And that's like hard to do. There's the great FDR quote, "Comparison is the thief of joy."
Right.
You know, and I think a lot of what contorts how companies and people behave isn't Wall Street putting pressure on them to make more money or whatever. It's just the fear of losing. Mm-hmm. It's the other person did it, and at first you're like, no, we wouldn't do that. And then it's like working for them, and you're like, well, maybe there's a way. And that's how our standards just lower over time.
Yeah.
You know, and we assume that of companies now. The Volkswagen thing was so depressing to me last year because I just thought, like, well, you know, fuck them, obviously, but also this just increases the cynicism we all have about all companies, and it creates more permission for companies to act in shitty ways because we just presume they're doing so.
Right.
And there's just this way that the market pushes innovation, pushes people to be ambitious, pushes many amazing things. Mm-hmm. But the market will also drive very bad behaviors that are quite successful.
Rewarded.
And that ultimately, that are rewarding in the short term and terrible in the long term. I mean, you just look at the financialization of the economy the last 40 years, and that's all that is.
Right.
But it just continues to reward people, and it's just for the world to not be that way either means adding degrees of guardrails on capitalism that are hard for us to comprehend in the moment we're in now, or require everyone like taking some vow to not be an asshole. But of course, all it takes is then that one person to be the asshole, and the other person's like, well, he's doing it, so
I can too.
So I can do it. So it's very hard. It's very, very hard, and it's so deeply emotional and rooted in insecurity and fear of losing, and it's something that I think almost all of us carry in our personal and professional lives, and it's just like it's a flaw of our species, you know, that really comes out to play, especially in these sorts of businesses that operate at this scale where a company can also be faceless. Like, you can't do this and be a neighborhood bakery.
Right. Like,
you got a business. You pay a cost because you see your customers every day. But at this sort of scale, you can behave this way and make a lot of money and not feel any ill effects for quite a while.
Well, that's what the internet is, right? It
yeah, exactly.
Lifts everything to a network effect at the expense of the local.
Yeah.
So if you could go back and give yourself one tip or piece of advice when founding Kickstarter, what would you say?
Well, God, I don't know. I just think that's such a hard question and a good question, but I mean, my first thought was like, what would I do differently? I don't think I would do anything differently so far. I mean, I'm grateful for all of it. We have made mistakes,
right?
But like, we had to.
Right.
You had to like really know anything. To have any wisdom, you got to fuck up.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like,
so
I just think of terrible things like be yourself, which is like, oh my God.
So Yancey, let's
just throw up together. But that's kind of it though, you know, because just like what we are is like a very sincere expression of who we are. And I think that matters. And maybe I'm fooling myself to think that matters, but I think that matters. And we've always like really held to that pretty well. And there's always been many opportunities to not. And I don't know. Now I think like that's been a good strategy, which just it feels like very grade school, but maybe that makes it great.
Maybe you would have told yourself to take a computer science class.
I actually did take 2 computer science classes. I enjoyed it greatly, but I'm like a thinker, creative person thing.
Okay, so let's flash it forward.
Okay.
10 years from now, you go to the people who are, no, 50 years from now, you go to the people who are running Kickstarter. What do you have to tell them?
I'm just going to be, just trying to be that long-term view that's just trying to help see beyond whatever the problems of now are that always seem so insurmountable, and probably just encouraging just a real focus on like how are we best achieving our mission at this moment. I mean, the companies that last that long are companies that have that, and inevitably they're like family-run Japanese knife makers, who last that long, where it's just like father to son to father to daughter, whatever, but there is a real focus on excellence and craft, and that does seem to be the best recipe for longevity, which we would love to have. We of course would love to be that sort of utility that's always there as the place where a new idea has a chance to find its people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So I'll just be like, the old dude that people barely listen to, but who just says the same things all the time. It's great. I can't wait.
Well, we really can't wait either.
Yeah.
Yancey, thank you for bringing us Kickstarter and for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you.